Ka rere atu taku poe I runa ina haere na nui o te tāne ko haki I haere a haki nei I atu I te kainga o te aroha I runa ina awa me ngā mania Ki tamaki makaurau Ka rere taku poe I runa ina naru nui ki nā whare a korani o oropi Ka wirira taku poe I te hauera o initoni hia Ka nohora a iono te hoa taua haki Ka hoki taku poeri te tonu ki te maroro Ki te kainga tupu Ki whanga nui a tara E rangatira hata whai te tanero He kai hautu maurire te tanera He pekati toki e kore e whati Ko marere te wairua Ko kahara te maunua He waikoia kia kore whitikia Me te korokoro tui, te puara ahaki Me te waiata kurimako, te tangi aia Ko haki te kaitito, ko haki te tangata e whakanuia Ana e tātou I tēnei rā E haka e haki I tēnei rā
Kia ora, welcome. I'm Peter Walls, a long-time friend and colleague of Jack's. Thank you, Mere. Thank you, Gamelin Padhang Monka. Thank you all for coming, Yono. It's lovely to see the Mayor, Celia Wade-Brown, here this afternoon, and I see friends and colleagues from all over New Zealand who've come for this very special event. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Michael Norris, who's going to be giving us a commentary on the music that will be performed this afternoon.
Thanks, Peter. It's a bittersweet pleasure to introduce today's program, a beautiful series of pieces. I can't think of a more gorgeous set of little musical gems. And Jack himself chose these works about 2 months ago. I went to visit him in Durham Street. He was sitting up in bed, and while he was a shadow of his former physical self, he still somehow summoned up the energy to print off one of his infamous to-do lists for me. He thrust a piece of paper at me saying, "Mike, you're going to organize a party for me. Here's my wish list." All of the pieces on this list he somehow considered illustrated an aspect of his musical, cultural, and personal loves. Of course, the music of Asia is there. He requested the gamelan Padang Moncha to fill the space with the sounds of Indonesia as people entered and exited. And thank you, that was gorgeous. But of course, also the music of China is a recurring theme throughout today's program. Jack's love of beauty, stillness, and simplicity shines through in a series of iridescent musical gems. The first of these works that we will hear, he simply called Buyi One. It's a piece for string quartet that frames a field recording of 2 women from the Buyi minority of Yunnan in southern China. Jack was particularly struck by the way in which these women quietly cadence onto a major second, something that in common practice Western harmony that Jack was brought up in is a dissonance and thus strictly forbidden. Jack revelled in breaking these rules and in revelling in these quiet, dissonant pleasures. He was also intrigued by the way in which this music reminded him very much of the music of Bulgarian women's choirs, half a world away. Before the piece is performed, however, we're pleased today to be able to screen a short excerpt from a video interview that Jack gave, in which he talks about discovering the music of this region.
Big topic, big country. Yeah. So, and it began really in the 80s, and I met somebody here. He had cassette recordings of polyphonic music of the minorities. And this was some music I'd never heard before, and it certainly didn't sound like any Chinese music I'd ever heard. So I realized in China there were whole areas of music unknown. So I engineered a visit to China in the mid-80s, and I made contacts with composers there, but I also spent some time in the countryside and discovered the so-called minorities. And we made a film, and I gathered material, and I made other trips. So it became, I mean, there's no end to China.
The next work in the program is a short excerpt from Jack's monumental work of 2013, Songs and Dances of Desire in Memoriam Carmen Rupe. This hour-long work for orchestra, guitar, 2 mezzo-sopranos, countertenor and drag artist was premiered by the Auckland Philharmonic Orchestra, though we'll hear a reduction for string quartet and mezzo and sadly no drag artist today. It featured a series of songs and dances associated with the complex cultural background of Wellington transvestite nightclub owner, exotic dancer, and one-time mayoral candidate Carmen Rupe, previously known as Trevor Rupe. Throughout the work, Jack deconstructs famous arias from Bizet's Carmen, which you will hear a snippet of habanera in this piece. Naturally, however, not sung by a soprano as they should be, but by a countertenor. As well as arranging some of the dances that were played in Carmen's nightclub. But despite the lightness of many of these works, a more serious side is evident in others. And Jack, while not himself a political animal, constantly professed admiration for outcasts and outsiders and activists. In this song, the Puerto Rican poet Julia de Burgos pens an angry letter to her public self, taking up arms against the mid-century norms of male chauvinism. I'll read you the English translation of the text. The people are saying that I am your enemy, that in poetry I give you the world. They lie, Julia de Burgos, they lie, Julia de Burgos. The voice that rises in my verses is not your voice, it is my voice. For you are the clothing and I am the essence. Between us lies the deepest abyss. You are the bloodless doll of social lies, and I the virile spark of human truth. You are the honey of courtly hypocrisy, not I. I bear my heart in all my poems. You, like your world, are selfish, not I. I gamble everything to be what I am. You are only the serious lady, Senora Donna Julia, not I. I am life, I am strength, I am woman. You belong to your husband, your mast, not I. I belong to nobody or to all, for to all I give myself and my pure feelings and thoughts. You curl your hair and paint your face, not I. I am curled by the wind, painted by the sun. You are the lady of the house, resigned, submissive, tied to the bigotry of men, not I. I am Rocinante, bolting free, wildly snuffing the horizons of the justice of God. Please welcome the New Zealand String Quartet, Alexander Gunchenko and Anna Pierad.
Ya las gentes murmuran que yo soy tu enemiga. ¿Por qué dicen que en verso doy al mundo tuyo?
Ave Signora, Signora Roma. No, 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 no. Yo soy la vida, la fuerza, l'amore. Tú eres de tu marido, de tu amo. Yo no. Yo de nadie, o de todos, porque a todos en mi limpio sentir, o en mi pensar me doy. Tú te rizas el pelo y te puntas. Yo no, a mí me riza el viento, a mí me pinta el sol. Tú eres dama casera, resignada, sumisa, todos a los prejuicios de los hombres. Yo soy rafinante, arriesga, despojado.
This is Jack. Jack's distinctive phone greeting, never, "Hi, it's Jack here." This is Jack. The last time I got one of those phone calls was a month ago. "How are you?" I asked. His answer, "Well, that's a question. I've told them no more intervention." The phone call was really about planning this memorial celebration for this afternoon. When he asked me to do this eulogy, I felt both honoured and apprehensive, since I knew just how many people would be here today who loved Jack and were loved by him, and who knew Jack in contexts that were outside my own experience. I assume that in asking me to do this, he hoped that I'd put my music historian's hat on and try to give you all a fair picture of Jack Body, musician. So I shall begin, hoping that this is Jack. The historical bit has just been made a whole lot easier thanks to the remarkable book that was launched a few days before Jack's death. There we see the photos of the beautiful house in rural Te Aroha and learn about the bulldozer with a steering wheel instead of levers that sat out in the yard, his enjoyment of childhood holidays at Waihi Beach and his fondness for taking school friends up to the top of Mount Te Aroha suggest that he had a happy and archetypal Kiwi upbringing. There are glimpses of Jack emerging as a champion at both music and athletics during his years at King's College in Auckland, and we learn of friendships formed in those years with Roger McGurr, Neil Brownlee, Philip's father, Ian Weddy, and Alan Thomas. We read of his studies with Ronald Tremaine at Auckland University and of his early encounters with Douglas Lilburn in the electronic studio at Victoria before pursuing this interest in Cologne and Utrecht. we're given a vivid sense of the impact that Asia, and Indonesia in particular, made on him during those first travels overseas. And particularly in the closing contribution from Jack himself, we meet Yono, and we see that handsome young man that Jack fell in love with in 1976, someone that we have all come to love and to admire, especially for his unfaltering and care and concern for our friend. My personal knowledge of Jack dates really from his appointment at Victoria University in 1980. He was appointed to the position from which Douglas Lilburn had just retired. Douglas remained a central figure in our lives, and he and Jack had a strong bond. Jack was one of those who took particular care of Douglas during his final illness. Jack joined a department that had David Farquhar and Ross Harris also teaching composition. Even at the time, I felt proud of the fact that our music department had three such remarkable composers, all figures who commanded respect and admiration, but who each had a completely distinct stylistic orientation. Not for us, the composer-in-residence approach of so many other universities abroad. Moreover, Jack joined a department with a strong interest in new music, with people like Margaret Nielsen and Elizabeth Kerr eager to facilitate performances of contemporary works. This, I guess, was partly the legacy of Naughty Fred Page and his successor Jenny MacLeod, who both spent their careers rebelling against anything that had the slightest whiff of colonial heritage or of academia about it. That strength in composition, the heritage built originally on Lilburn's appointment in 1947, continues in the New Zealand School of Music to this day. The other aspect of the Victoria University Music Department that made it such a congenial place for Jack was the gamelan, established at Vic in 1973 with the loan of a beautiful set of instruments from the Indonesian government, and augmented when Alan Thomas was appointed to the staff in 1977, bringing with him instruments from Cirebon. Apart from one fascinating introductory session with Yoko Sutrisno, I've never sat behind those instruments to play them, unlike Judith Exley and others here who have been part of the ensemble for decades. I nevertheless have a strong sense of privilege that this sound world became a significant feature of my own musical horizon and of every music student that passed through Victoria. New music, electroacoustic music, gamelan as an enduring window on the musics of Asia, these things have given a special character to the School of Music, and we've all been the richer for that, and Jack has been at the heart of them. Imagine the audacity of taking a New Zealand gamelan ensemble to Indonesia, not once, but several times. Jack the entrepreneur. Just think how many times Jack has made the impossible happen. I was overseas at the time of the original Sonic Circus in 1974, but I well remember the 1987 event. Everybody was mobilised. The NZSO, Schola Musica, the Victoria University Orchestra, I've forgotten who else, and it seemed like every space in what is on its way to becoming a Civic Square music hub was taken over. So too were the NZSO studios in Willis Street. And there were crowds thronging in those spaces at the concerts and moving between the extraordinary array of performances on offer. Then there were the Asia Pacific Festivals in 1992 and 2007. For the 1992 festival, Jack asked whether Catherine and I would take a billet. Of course, thinking student composer, we agreed readily, and then found ourselves having Filipino conductor Francisco Feliciano, a personal friend of the Marcos family, staying in our house. And our house back then was furnished with bunks and beanbags. Francisco actually turned out to be a charming guest. Another of Jack's visitors to New Zealand, Professor Yao Shong Du, who came out for Ali, also stayed in our house for 3 weeks, and Catherine and I will always be grateful to Jack for introducing us to this remarkable man, one of the most brilliant, intelligent, funny people that we've ever met. Occasionally, making the impossible happen related to Jack's own projects. Ali actually is an outstanding example here, and Jack remained immensely grateful to Dr. Ian Pryor, who mobilised support when it looked as if the planned festival performances might not happen, and Ian was personally so generous in Jack actually explicitly asked me to mention that today. Mostly, though, Jack's big projects were not about getting his own music performed. Many here will have reacted enthusiastically to requests from Jack to get in behind these projects. Why not? His charm, his sense of mission, and the fact that he was unsparing in his own efforts to make good things happen made such approaches irresistible. Our musical and cultural institutions responded similarly. Creative New Zealand, the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra, the New Zealand International Festival of the Arts, the Auckland Festival, Chamber Music New Zealand, the Auckland Philharmonia, and so on. It's a long list. Jack's unique negotiating technique went something like this. Listen up. Stage 1, A and B are completely on board, we just need you, C, to get with the program. Stage 2, B and C are completely on board, we just need you, A, to get with the program. Stage 3, A and C are completely on board, well, you get the idea. Done. Meanwhile, back at A, B, and C, or the offices of A, B, and C, the decision makers are gazing out the window thinking, how did that happen? But we, were always pleased and proud that it did happen. Nobody could regret for a second the way Jack's initiatives have enriched musical life in New Zealand. Even if he'd never composed a note of music, he would have made a substantial contribution to music in Aotearoa. Many of the book's contributors testify to Jack's generosity and his desire to promote composers and music that he believed in. The single most telling example would probably be Waitiata Music Press. The catalogue expanded hugely during Jack's years. Typically, he extended operations to the issuing of CDs designed to illustrate and promote the work of the composers he published. The press received modest but regular support from the Lilburn Trust, and every year the members of the Trust's Music Advisory Committee would pore over budgets from Jack that made the concept of back of the envelope seem reasonably close to best practice. Michael Norris has now taken over as editor, and as you might expect, there's a new meticulousness surrounding the press's operations. Jack took over the press from Douglas Lilburn, who had founded it. Not stylistically, but in almost every other way, Douglas was an enormous and positive influence on Jack. He modelled selflessness in his desire to see New Zealand music flourish. Apart from Waitiata Music Press, he established the Lilburn Trust to further the cause. Jack told me a few months ago that, with Yono's blessing, he had made provision for the Lilburn Trust eventually to benefit from his estate. All who care about the development of music in New Zealand will be grateful for that. Most of all, of course, we should be grateful to Jack for his music. He was, above all else, a composer. One of my abiding memories will be of visiting Jack during his long and somewhat depressing stay in Wellington Hospital early in 2012. Jack had had his Acorn computer, the original Sibelius program host, brought into the hospital. Despite serious illness, he was determined to make the most of the opportunity provided by the APO Composer in Residence Award and was just getting on with it. Why is Jack a major composer? I think we're hearing that this afternoon, and of course this afternoon's concert is particularly interesting since, as Michael mentioned, these pieces were all chosen by Jack for this occasion. They meant a lot to him. Moreover, Michael is providing an expert introduction to all of these, so I don't need really to comment further, but I would like to conclude with some brief observations about pieces of Jack's that I know well through having conducted them. First, Poems of Solitary Delights. This was premiered at one of the last Cambridge music schools with John Hopkins conducting. John, a great champion of New Zealand music, had suggested to Jack that more varied metrical groupings than the original might work better. Hence, the Victoria University Orchestra got to test drive a revised version of the work in a concert later in the same year. This work has since been recorded in a further revision by the NZSO with Ken Young conducting. It's an absolutely delightful work, a setting of a cycle of poems by the 19th century Japanese poet Takabana Akami. It's easy to see why these appeal to Jack. The poems evoke an Asian setting. They are reflective and sensual. Some of the sensuality is directed at the tactile pleasures of taking up a brush to paint. Jack the artist, the photographer, must have related strongly to these. Above all, these poems have a whimsical quality that we recognize in Jack's personality. His settings are deftly written with exquisitely chosen orchestral colours. There are no double basses, so the strings have an airy quality. The lyric tenor soloist alternated between narration and occasional singing. In so many ways, these pieces seem quintessentially Jack. They're unlike anything else, and they're magic. More recently, I've conducted the meditations on Michelangelo with Opus Orchestra and Lara Hall as soloist. We heard one of these meditations at the NZSO the other night, and they are well represented this afternoon, both in a string quartet arrangement and through the song settings on which the original pieces are based. They seem set to become cornerstones of the repertoire, and deservedly so. The lyricism, the expressive harmonic treatment, and once again, the subtle range of timbre made the meditations a deeply personal work. Jack saw the Michelangelo poems as the testament of a gay artist and responded accordingly and very movingly. In one of his last conversations, Jack told me that the Songs and Dances of Desire, performed after many years of gestation at the Auckland Arts Festival in 2013, and Alley were the works that he regarded as his two greatest contributions. We're getting a glimpse of the Songs and Dances of Desire this afternoon. I've written about Alley in the book, so don't need to say anything more here, except that I do regard this opera as a work of genius, thrilling, beautiful, profound. It's been heartening in the last few days to hear that a performance of Alley is being planned in Hangzhou, China. The consoling thing about mourning an artist like Jack is to know that in the most important way possible, his work will live on. One hopes that as his reputation grows across the world, generations to come will feel proud that Jack Boddy lived and worked here in Aotearoa.
In the Love Sonnets of Michelangelo from 1982, Jack sets the poetry of Michelangelo di Ludovico Buonarroti Simoni, otherwise known as Michelangelo. We, of course, know Michelangelo primarily as a great painter and sculptor, but he was also an accomplished architect, engineer, and poet, who, along with Da Vinci, is considered the archetypal Renaissance man. Michelangelo's greatest sequence of poetry was undoubtedly the Love Sonnets, written for the object of his affection, the young and handsome nobleman Tommaso de' Cavalieri. Here, Michelangelo imagines himself as a silkworm who would cast off his own skin so that he may forever embrace his lover in the form of a newly woven shirt. Jack's setting of this poem is exquisite. The vocal line curves and bends. Chromatic intervals are bittersweet, and they always contain sensuality. The text of the sonnet translates thus: "To others merciful, and only to itself unkind, this lowly creature who sheds its skin in pain, that it may give pleasure to others, dies that they may live. So do I long for such a destiny, that from my death, my Lord, you might alone take life. Then by my death I too might be changed like the worm which casts its skin on stone. For if that skin were mine, I could at least be woven in a gown to clasp that breast, and so embrace the beauty which I crave. Then would I gladly die. Or could I save my Lord's feet from the rain by being shoes upon his feet? This also would I choose." And here to present the third of Jack's love sonnets of Michelangelo is mezzo-soprano Lyndon Loader, whom Jack specifically requested in admiration of her heartbreaking recording of this work on the Waiteata label.
spoglia sol per morte si può dir bennato così vuole sia lia signor fatto vestir so viva di mia morte spoglia che come servei al sasso si coglia pur per molte potria congiar mio stato stringe si bel seno che il giorno pur resti le pianelle fossero chi passe acque fanno di collana che al piovere pur addosso almeno.
Jack loved to rearrange things. There was nothing that gave him more pleasure than putting old music into new clothes. When he was transcribing, arranging, or as he liked to call it, recontextualizing music, he was in a sense fulfilling the same role as he did as a photographer with a model. So finding the best lighting to emphasize hidden features, running it through some unusual color process, or perhaps choosing a slow shutter speed so that the edges just blur a little bit. I remember about 10 years ago, Jack roped me into such a project some of you might recall called the Davy Passion. Jack had assembled a collection of composers, including myself, David Farquhar, Gillian Whitehead, Ross Harris, amongst others. And he gave each of us a small section of one of the earliest polyphonic settings of the Passion by the 16th century composer Richard Davey. And like some corps exquisite, we were told just to take that bit of music and compose a surrounding part for the Royal New Zealand Air Force Band, while the Tudor consort would sing the original at the same time. Somehow it worked. I'm not quite sure how, but it was a lot of fun. In this work, Meditations on Michelangelo for Violin and String Orchestra, written in 2007, Jack took the vocal lines from the love sonnets written some 25 years earlier and added the surrounding parts in the other strings. So today we'll have the New Zealand String Quartet with NZSO bass player Alexander Gunchenko, and head of strings at Te Koki New Zealand School of Music, Martin Risey, will play the solo violin part.
Thank you.
Now I'd like to ask Vicky Holmes, who's Jack's niece, to come and give a tribute on behalf of the family.
In the recently released Festschrift, Jack, thank you to those who put that together, Jeff Chappell quotes Jack exclaiming, "Better to aim for the moon and fall flat on your ass than not aim at all." And he was cajoling Jeff Chappell into working with him on the Alley Opera. And I thought when I read that, that may just be the attitude that made Jack stand out from the rest of the Body clan, all of whom were solid farming people, kind, reliable, frugal, practical, loving, but not natural risk takers, nor keen to push out of the box as Jack was. Jack grew up in a house on the outskirts of Te Aroha, a magical house on Bossons Road. Magical because of its secret gardens, its orchard, a grand driveway, beveled glass doors, black and white tiles, a fish head that spouted gushing water into the bath, a stunning wooden staircase banister to slide down, and at the bottom, lighting from a magnificent coloured glass lead light ball, delicately balanced on the feet of a reclining black female nude. When Uncle Jack was young, there was also a tennis court, but that was well overgrown by the time I got to enjoy the property. Jack spent much of his time as an only child in this house, as his three much older sisters, Raewyn, Bev and Pat, were away at boarding school or had left home. And I can really imagine his creative spirit being ignited in that place. Of course, his dad, Stan, my granddad, occupied himself fully during the day with his contracting work on his bulldozers and at the farm, leaving Jack with either Ruve or Ruru, as we sort of called her, or with Granny Body, who, as Jennifer reminded me, used to call him Jackie. Maybe he learned his networking skills from Ruru, who tripped from meeting to meeting with a young Jack in tow. And sounds like you all know about his networking skills. Piano lessons were organised with Mr. Cranner, and Raewyn tells of Jack enthusiastically biking to lessons, head down, pedalling furiously, then on arrival, spitting on his hands and rubbing them on his shorts in preparation for his lesson. They all had piano lessons, the whole family, but Jack was the only one that really had the musical talent. I think he got every single ounce. Anyway, at 13 he was off to King's School, and I remember Jack telling me that it was on seeing a picture of a wild Beethoven that he began imagining himself as having an artistic future. So began the creation of Jack. Waihi Beach was the family holiday gathering spot. My older cousins remember Jack cartwheeling and tumbling along the beach, using his gymnastic moves from school. Running races with a bronzed Uncle Jack in his mid-20s were different. He always made us run backwards. He was the best body surfer, no pun intended, he was the best body surfer I have ever seen. Having discarded the plywood boogie board that Grandad made in favour of pure body surfing, his choice of wave, timing in launching himself, and the flurry of his arms ensured he caught every wave and made it to the shallows every time. From the beach, you could see only a smiling face and the tips of his shoulders in amongst the frothing white waves. I used to copy him. I used to do everything that I could do that he was doing, and I could never catch the waves like Jack. Jack was often travelling overseas, studying, working, researching, or receiving awards, and my mother, Bev, was always confounded by the casualness of Jack as he headed off in seemingly disorganised fashion, toothbrush protruding from his pocket. I remember blue aerograms would arrive in the post, particularly from Indonesia. Jack brought his visiting musical colleagues from overseas to visit his Te Araha family and their farms, some even staying to enjoy a New Zealand Christmas. On a trip back in the late 70s, Jack brought a friend, a very special friend as it turns out, Yono, intelligent, handsome, cheeky and full of fun, just like Jack, and a great addition to our family. I was telling Yono today, I brag about having an Indonesian uncle. How cool is that? As opportunity allowed, his sisters, nieces and nephews would attend Jack's events, and I was blessed to attend many. Possibly my highlight was attending the Alley Opera that you've talked about today. I would love to see that again. Sounds like I have to go to China. I have a son there now, so that would be good. We all expected Jack to live a long time. His own dad passed away just short of 103. Stan's brother, Gordon, Jack's uncle, lived to 101. Jack had a very close relationship with Uncle Gordon, as he too was very well travelled. Gordon was extremely interested in Jack's musical life, and they maintained a close level of communication. What made Jack special to our family was that he was a passionate, enthusiastic, warm, entertaining brother and uncle who brought joy to our family. His long and loving relationship with Yono is especially touching. Jack was true to himself, and I love that. And we will miss him.
Jack always strove to write music that was simple and effortless, yet vivid and fresh. I remember as a third-year student at Victoria School of Music, going into his room to show off my latest piano piece. He asked me to talk about it, and I explained some particularly convoluted system I'd developed for the pitch structure of the opening page. And after I finished talking, he looked at me with a smile and said, "Yes, yes, very clever, but..." Jack's music has always been the epitome of absolute formal and material concision. Whenever I want to teach my students about the way to extract the utmost effect from the least material, I will always reach for one of his scores. In this next piece, the Lacrimée, from his three-movement work for solo piano from 1995 entitled Sarajevo, Jack has attained an almost transcendent musical language that is at once sad and haunting, while simultaneously being angry and condemnatory. Please welcome Head of Piano at Te Koki's New Zealand School of Music, Jian Lu. Since Jack's passing, numerous tributes have come in, both from New Zealand but also overseas. So Peter and I we've just chosen 6 short tributes to read out. The first is from Barry Truax, who is a world-renowned electroacoustic composer and professor of School of Communication at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, Canada. I've known and admired Jack ever since his first visit to the Borges Festival in the 1970s, when his piece Musik dari Jalan was awarded a first, later to be followed by 2 others in his Indonesian triptych. From today's perspective, the breath of fresh southern hemisphere air that this piece brought to electroacoustic music then, with its exquisite combination of soundscape recordings involving street musicians, as implied by the title, and processed versions of these sounds with seductive transitions between them, set an example for what has evolved into soundscape composition with cross-cultural references. Jack was also an early and rather lonely at the time pioneering voice for discussing gender and sexuality issues in electroacoustic music. Recently, his innovative work, Intimate Stories, one of which featured reminiscences of his partner growing up in Indonesia, was issued on a Borges CD. I trust that his colleagues in New Zealand and elsewhere will attempt to ensure that his work and memory are kept alive. His was a unique and powerful voice that deserves to continue to be heard. And this from Anea Lockwood, composer and sound artist. Jack has been a beloved friend and remarkable man, brave and exciting composer and a great teacher on many levels. Intellectually and physically, he was a constant traveller, forming vital links between New Zealand musicians and cultures around the Pacific, which will continue to grow. His generous, joyous spirit has grounded us in the world, enriching us so much. For me personally, he was a vibrant, essential link to my homeland community and a deeply kind friend. I am so fortunate to have known him, and I cherish his music. And thank you, Yono, for all your loving care of Jack over the many years of your partnership. My thoughts are with you now.
The next one's from Tan Dun. And Tan Dun's a remarkable figure. Of course, he went on to become this hugely famous person, and he's come back to New Zealand to work with the NZSO and at the International Festival here several times. But when he was just becoming known, Jack had cottoned on to the fact that he was a really quite exceptional talent, and he did his usual thing of just finding some money, persuading the School of Music to put some money into the first of a kind of extended composer residencies. So Tan Dun came and worked at the Victoria University School of Music for 6 weeks, and we all got to know him, and he was an absolutely charming person, and it's just nice to think back on that now. But so Tan Dun writes, "I'm so sorry to hear of Jack's passing. Please know that he was often in my thoughts this last year. I met Jack back in the 1980s, and he has since become a wonderful mentor and spiritual guide for all young people, both from the East and West. Back in that time, I was one of those young people. I worked with Jack at Victoria University of Wellington to discover all the creative uses of sound, from the organic to the academic. Jack was a wonderful guide through this process, my spiritual soulmate and warmest of friends. I will always remember his laughter and love." Next tribute is from Vincent Ward, the filmmaker. "Dear Jack, I saw you 3 weeks ago and sat on the edge of your bed and talked. You gave me almost half an hour. It didn't feel like a goodbye, merely a conversation about things that interested you and me. I don't feel sad at your passing because you weren't sad. Time to let it all go, as even simple tasks were becoming too challenging, painful, and that from someone who never easily gave in. What I saw of you then is what I have seen of you always, a man with kindness and humour, wit, generosity, warmth, a sharpness, understanding and empathy with people, of what it is to work as a person in the arts in this challenging country, and yet never bitterness, of always finding a way through, but most of all, a passion for life and work. How do you capture the man in a few words? Or is it better with silence, perhaps, and rising out of that, his music, and the voices all at once, the many voices of his many friends, we capture it and carry him in our hearts, minds. Much loved by all and appreciated, with me as no exception, Vincent.
And this from composer, friend and colleague Chris Cree Brown. Jack has often been in my thoughts over the last few months as he struggled with cancer. Last week I played some students in Lübeck his delightful Musik dari Jalan, and they responded to its clever structure and human warmth, as I did when I first heard it. We've lost a wonderful human being whose positive and generous energy seemed unending. My thoughts are now with Yono. And finally, this from Roland Peelman, who's the conductor of the Song Company, the Sydney-based vocal ensemble. For some composers, the canvas is right in front of them, a plain, virgin sheet of paper. For some, it is the instrument that they can associate with. For others, it is the tradition in which their craft and mind is shaped. But for Jack, this canvas is the world itself, this conglomerate of places and culture, communities, complete with their own rites and rituals. He never wrote music about the world. It's as if he writes music onto the world itself, as if the world offered itself to his soul, ready to be written on. Jack's choral music is amongst the finest written in New Zealand. His best-known works, People Look East and Carol to St. Stephen, are staples of the choral repertoire. With their vivid textures, effective part writing, and luscious harmonies. The Five Lullabies of 1989 are perhaps less well-known, but they deserve their place amongst the best choral works ever written. In these gorgeous works, Jack has conceived of writing a set of imaginary lullabies, each written using made-up words that he himself made up, and each having a distinct musical language, as if Jack was trying to imagine into being new, as yet undiscovered cultures. Of course, the influence from existing cultures is never too far away, and in this, the final lullaby, Jack opens up a quiet, sparse musical language in which cadences land on soft dissonances, inspired both by the music of the Boii minority that we heard at the beginning of this concert, as well as the music of Bulgaria. The text Kalumbaya is simply the name of a place to the north of Manila in the Philippines, but whose sonorous symbols were irresistible to Jack. Please welcome Baroque Voices, directed by Pepe Bega.
Kalumbaya,
next work is the only one in today's program that Jack did not specifically request to be performed today, but after consulting with the New Zealand String Quartet, we believed should be played. Cries from the Border was commissioned by the New Zealand String Quartet and the Australian vocal ensemble The Song Company about a year or so ago, but it almost didn't happen. As Jack's health failed and his strength ebbed, he informed the quartet that he wouldn't be able to accept their commission, and so alternative arrangements would have to be made for their program. But sometime later, a hurried call from Jack informed the quartet that no, in fact, he had written the piece after all, and I believe he even managed to travel to Nelson to hear the premiere in February. So the piece refers to the Jewish philosopher and cultural critic Walter Benjamin, who in 1942 fled Germany into Spain via the French border, of course to escape from the Nazi regime. But Franco had at that stage ordered all Spanish police to cancel transit visas and return any refugees to France, which was at the time under Nazi occupation. And Benjamin, fearing death at the hands of the Nazis, killed himself in a hotel room from an overdose of morphine. Jack has written his own words, and it refers to his own border crossing, one in which, unlike Benjamin, there was no chance of being refused entry. It reads, "Your name is known, your age is known, you are expected. The border is open, the stream of your life has become a river whose banks grow ever wider. It is time to embrace the ocean."
Your name is known.
For Jack, Indonesia was the ultimate exotic, alluring destination, an assault on the senses, full of hot, busy, noisy, smelly streets, lush jungles, remarkable temples, spicy food, incredible music. Something unusual, surprising, and astounding was to be found around every street corner. Indeed, his electroacoustic composition Musik Dari Jalan, that won Fizz Prize in the 1976 Borge competition, featured field recordings of the highly musical cries of street vendors. And his 1993 CD Suara Environmental Music from Java featured such astounding sounds as a gamelan piece being played on stalactites in a cave. For Jack, of particular interest was the so-called colotomic structure of the gamelan, a cycling, looping musical language that achieved something remarkable. While the melodic instruments gradually slow down over the course of the piece, the large gaps that open up between each melody note are filled in with ever faster patterns played by the elaborating instruments. As Jack told me only a few days before he was transferred to the Mary Potter Hospice, he wanted to have the voice of Budi Putra to finish off this concert because for him, Budi's voice, accompanied only by the soft, delicate tones of the gender, was his idea of pure musical perfection.
Na